Hello and welcome to the Tavern Chat podcast. I am your host, Eric Tenkar, your bartender in the OSR, your main proprietor of the Tenkar's Tavern blog. Today we have yet another interview from the designers and makers, and this one is going to be a doozy because we have none other than the OSR's very own Jason Hobbs. Welcome.
Hey, Eric, how's it going?
It's going very well. Now, I've known Jason for years. We gamed together using Hangouts and not Roll20. Back then, was it Roll20?
Tabletop Forge, maybe. I don't know.
Oh my God, that's right. Tabletop Forge before it got rolled into Roll20. That's right. Holy shit, we go back.
Yes, it's a ways.
Yeah, and that's something that Tabletop Forge is like one of the earlier VTTs that successfully funded on Kickstarter, and then successfully got merged into Roll20.
Yeah, that's a story in its own, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Talking about that, really.
No, we can touch upon that too. I'm going to start you out with the same 5 questions, Jason. I start everyone out with. It gives us a nice little firm ground to start with, and then after that, we're going to do pretty much a hex crawl. And since you're well known for hex crawls, I think that works out fine.
Okay.
Jason, tell us about your first RPG experience.
All right, so I'm old, Eric. I don't know if I'm Eric old, but I'm Hobbs old. And
how old is Hobbs old? I need to know this.
I'm 48.
Oh no, you're still young, man. I'm the old man here. I'm 51.
Okay. All right. Well, I mean, you look older, but
Yeah, I know. Well, you look young, man. You got that youthful exuberance look. It's like, let's party, dude. So it's like, all right, he's anywhere from 25 to ageless. I don't know.
I thought you were gonna say like the pregnant glow, but I like the exuberance better.
Dude, if you had a pregnant glow, sorry, you're making me laugh right now. That would be one hell of a story to tell. But, rapid test, okay.
All right, so I'll go into. I'll tell you. So I always say that I started with the Holmes edition in 1978. Like, I don't even know necessarily why I've decided on that, but I remember playing with all my older cousins. There were, I think, 36 grandkids in my family.
Christ.
So there were a lot of us, and a lot of times we would hang out at my well, I have 2 half brothers, and the only time I could really see him, his mom didn't really want to bring him to our house in Mendota, Illinois, where we lived, but she would bring her halfway to our grandparents. So I would, on the weekends during the summer, especially, we would all like hang out at my grandparents' house, which was like a 2-room house with no running water in it either. So there was still an outhouse.
Damn.
But, and I mean, this is 1978. So
yeah,
most people had, bathrooms and such.
Right.
But what my aunt and uncle lived like right next door, and it was on this dead end street in Amboy, which still only has about, I don't know, 1,500 people or something. Very small town. But we always like to go over to my aunt and uncle's house to use the bathroom more than anything. But they had a bunch of kids. And at one point, one of my older cousins of the Stevenses, when I talk about Hawk, who is one of the artists that work on our zine, he's a Stevens. He's my cousin. And his older sister, like one of her first, probably wasn't her first. I have no idea how old she was. I mean, I was only 8. So
everybody seems like they're like old people when you're 8.
Yeah, everyone is, right?
Yeah. Like when you're 16, it's like they're gonna die soon.
Yeah. Well, he brought over a D&D game, and I got to play, which was pretty exciting for me because I didn't usually get to do a whole lot of stuff with the older cousins at that point. And it was Holmes, and I specifically remember one of my brothers making this character, Leuven Lightfingers. And I totally remember that name, and I don't know why. And a couple of years ago at North Texas, I went on this hunt because I knew it was a pre-gen, and I was trying to find out where he had gotten that name and where that character came from. And it took me, I don't know, I asked some people online and walking around talking to Bad Mike and all the people that, have their booths there at North Texas.
Right.
Finally, they were saying, oh, it's Holmes, and you have to get the adventure B1. In Search of the Unknown, and it's in there. And I'm like, what? And so, yeah, we finally found it. And all this searching and trying to figure stuff out, it was one line that just said Leuven Lightfingers and his stats. That was it.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
So that was a pretty was pretty engaging to me, and it kind of shows you how much imagination and creativity can come from just one line, really, when you think about it, so.
Oh yeah, and what I find amazing is that everybody I've spoken to has that unique experience of what their first gaming experience, and they can pretty much tell you, name of a character, or I remember rolling the stats. That thing gets burned into our head. It's amazing how it does.
Yeah, it totally. In some ways, I don't know. Some of it might be more me trying to fill in the blanks, because like I said, I was only 8, so
Right. Well, that's human. That's human nature.
yeah.
Memory is certainly not set in stone. But
if only.
But no, it's not. That's cool. All right. Well, here. What is your go-to RPG system and why?
I spent some time trying to find the perfect system, which I assume all of us have, and that's why we have so many games that exist in the OSR and everywhere, really, right?
Well, they're all somebody's fantasy heartbreaker. It's even something like anything beyond the original clones, and even the original clones aren't exact. They're more like an emulator than a duplicator of their source material. But you look at like Lamentations of the Flame Princess, Weird Fantasy. That's Raggy's house rules, pretty much, of BX.
Exactly, and that's a perfect lead-in to my answer, because I would say I play BX primarily, but
okay.
A lot of the rules, the house rules that we use, which when I say a lot, it's a page, right? And these are like written almost in stone. Obviously, we affect them, but I run a BX games that patrons can get in on, and so I kind of want to have these rules, up front, so people know what's going on, and so you don't have to explain them every time, right?
Right.
So when you got 60 different people who might play in the game at any time, you don't know who, because it's a drop in, drop out. So you gotta have some written in stone. But BX, I would say Axe was the closest probably to what our BX game looks like. But I stopped playing that.
Yeah, no, I like Axe because of the the racial classes that so you're not just like, I'm a dwarven fighter, which is like every other fighter but dwarf. You actually have a reason why they have their classes, why it's racist class, which leads us into the next question. Actually, racist class, yay or nay?
Well, I'm playing BX, so that's what I do the most often. I'm okay either way. I don't really care. I just want to play games, and when I'm GMing, I don't mind. That used to be a big thing that I did not like. I used to kind of hate the first edition rules, or AD&D. I'm supposed to say, sorry. And
you're not supposed to say. You can say what you want, Jason.
Well, I was corrected quite a few times in the past.
Oh, Jesus.
AD&D gatekeepers. No, I'm just kidding. It's just
no,
friends of mine.
Dude. There are gatekeepers everywhere, and the majority of them don't even realize they're gatekeeping.
Exactly. I would agree with that. I feel like I've been guilty of it in the past, but I think that the idea of race as class with multiple classes for each race is a great idea, and it's one I'm emulating in my own Heartbreaker. So there you go.
All right, cool. All right, we're gonna move on to question number 4. Where do you stand on Save or Die? And being a podcaster, I'm not asking you about the Save or Die podcast. I'm asking you about the actual Save or Die mechanic.
I think in the old school methodology of play, where you're making all of your decisions after character generation, not during character generation, which is kind of more of a modern idea, that Save or Die totally makes sense, because you're not spending a ton of time on the characters. When I'm playing BX and all you have to do is click a link and your character is done, it's not a big deal for your character to die. It still sucks when you finally get that guy up to 4th level or whatever, which is a long way in a BX game.
Yep.
And you basically get killed by a Save or Die, which has happened to me multiple times. And after the crying was finished, I usually, I was okay with it.
Yeah, you suck it up and you move on to your next character. Thank God they're so quick to roll out.
Exactly.
All right. Well, what would the teenage you think if they could see what you would accomplish in a hobby by this point in your life?
He'd probably say, "What the fuck, Hobbs? Man, I thought you had a lot of potential. When are you going to ever, get that figured out?"
Nice. But you have accomplished a lot, dude. You know,
I don't know, man. I
uh,
talk on mic sometimes and people listen. That's about it.
all right. Let's see. You got what, 3 highly successful podcasts? Unless I missed one.
Um, I guess you'd have to define highly successful for me, but people listen, I guess. And that's exciting for sure and completely humbling.
It,
Uh,
dude, I understand the completely humbling part, you know, profusely. But you've got probably one of the more better known voices in podcasting for the OSR, and you've been a participant in the OSR. I don't know, at least since Google Plus went up,
yeah.
because you've been very active.
Yeah. Someone told me there I do the work, which strangely enough is recipe for success in almost anything, which sounds weird when you talk about podcasting. But I think to me, that means you got to be around, be approachable, be friendly. Cause I mean, otherwise who's going to want to talk to you or listen to what you have to say if you're an a-hole, I guess. But
Well, I've
be
been accused of
active.
being an asshole, so I mean, hey,
I
people
mean,
still.
I'm an asshole, but still I'm a friendly one.
Oh yeah, no, dude, that certainly it helps, man. Come on, that's good. But yeah, I mean, I remember following your thoughts on Google Plus. Well, back when I used to like actually read Google Plus on a daily basis, and your insights into the hobby were always spot on. I was always like, you know, you would have done very well with the blog, but I don't think that your focus was blog like. And then you found podcasting, man, and you hit your stride right from the start.
Thanks. I appreciate that. There was a lot of people who started listening almost immediately, and it surprised the network people who were used to, because I mean, I didn't really even know that much about podcasting. I just listened to a couple different ones and I was like,
Right.
hey, this is my gig. I mean, I can talk and shoot the crap with about anyone. I just got to get all the smart people on my show and make fun of them or make fun of myself, and then everyone will enjoy it. So that was the recipe for success as far as that went.
But listen, your success is because you, like you said, you started out your podcast started out strong right from the gate, and that wasn't solely because you assembled a great team. Because you can assemble a great team, and if there's nobody looking to listen, it's going to take you a while to build up that word of mouth. But you'd already had a community that had formed around Hobbs, and that was
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah. It was, like humbling, like you say. I mean, they never really know what people think on the internet, really. But it was. I mean, they showed people like it. When you're just playing a game at a con, and some people seem like, oh, like you're some kind of important person or something. It's always very surprising to me. But they're like, oh yeah, I listened to what you said. Either whatever podcast they're talking about. Some people really love Hex Talk because it's a strong way of explaining kind of this mysterious methodology of play that people have always read about, but they didn't necessarily grok completely, right? So,
Well, that's the whole. I agree with that because running a hex crawl, people are like, oh, that's the only way to play an OSR game. Well, it isn't, but it is certainly a very valid way to play an OSR game. But you need certain skills, you need certain uh, talents that you have to learn to effectively run it, or else it becomes just a mindless march. And
yeah,
I've
it's become stagnant. I feel like if it easily can, because it's the perfect methodology for murder hobos. And if all they
yes,
really want to do is go find stuff, go find things, kill it, and take it, and just try and gain levels, eventually that gets old unless there's something else going on. And so you have to come up with those mechanics that would help make things go on that the players could eventually latch on to. And then that's when when people ask me, what the heck's emergent storytelling? You talk about it all the time, but I don't really understand what it is. That's what it is to me, because you're not, like I said earlier, you're making characters, you're clicking a button, and the granularity between characters is very, very small. So you really have to give them their story during play. So everything comes out at the table, and it isn't there in the beginning, but it happens as you play. Character stories get larger and larger. If they survive, if they don't, then obviously that character wasn't that important to begin with. That's the way I feel.
oh yeah, and I personally, for me, I think if you're gonna run a successful hex crawl, you, as a GM, you have to have a strong ability to improvise, and you can learn that. It's a skill that you can certainly learn and refine. But if you're so used to running your adventures literally from pre-written modules, a hex crawl is going to be a hard switch for your mind to adjust to.
Yeah, I would agree. When I started, I didn't run hex crawls. It's more of a thing that I've started in the past, since I've found the OSR, basically. Some of the stuff that I did was kind of like that, but mostly not. Mostly it was passive players reacting to whatever I said happened. Where in a hex crawl, it's way better when characters are actionary as opposed to reactionary. And it's not just the GM that has to think differently. It's really the players too, to make it successful.
Well, yeah, because they have to feed off of the little clues that you feed out, even if you don't realize that you're feeding out clues, and all of a sudden, some throwaway comment or throwaway location that you mentioned has become their focus. Now you're like, oh, well, I got to make this worthy of their focus. And I've enjoyed running hex crawls. I actually, one of the things I did when I came back to the hobby, I guess, came into the OSR, was I ran Black Marsh from Rob Conley, which is basically a hex crawl setting, and I think I ran that with I think I ran it with Axe, and it was a lot of fun, but it was a challenge to do that pretty much as your campaign coming back, because I hadn't really run a hex crawl technically when I was gaming in high school and college and junior high. It was, I guess you would call it episodic these days, where you went from adventure to adventure and there was very little lead between. It was whatever module I wanted to run from Dungeon Magazine was the next one that got run, and there weren't very many threads connecting anything.
Yeah, I would say that's episodic for sure.
Yeah, so I much prefer something that is on the hex crawl level, or at least if it's going to be episodic, you have to find the threads that connect things, and enough threads that it isn't a railroad. And I hate railroads. Oh my god.
Yeah, I mean, railroading has such a bad connotations these days, but in some ways, if you don't have characters or players who are going to be motivated or latch onto something eventually, you can just wander around, you're just floundering, or they're just treading water all the time, barely really making any stories. And that can be bad too. So there's some aspects of a railroad that can be good, but I think player agency is the real important aspect of that.
True. I mean, and when I think of railroading, I think of one very specific adventure that was on. I couldn't tell you the name of it right now. It was on RPG Now, and I was an early reviewer. And oh my god, if the players got off the path, these balls of swamp gas would shoot lightning at them to put them back. I mean, it was such a railroad that you could literally only one path to take, and if you stepped off the rails, you got killed. And I ranted about it in a blog post, and then the author told me I didn't know shit. And I might not know shit, but I did.
Right about that.
But I do know bad adventure design when I see it. So that was certainly it. Oh my god, I think that was my first review on RPG Now. I posted it up there too.
Do you feel like the higher level an adventure is written for? The higher level. Hey, what the hell is this cat doing on my lap? Anyway, she just started like going into an epileptic seizure or something. Not really. She was scratching, but
yeah, I know the feeling.
Anyhow, the higher level that an adventure is written for, the more railroady it is, because they're trying to make it so high level characters can't break it.
Definitely, and I think that's my look on how the levels go, especially in the OSR. I think that everybody enjoys playing levels 1 through 3 because that's when you kind of get a handle on your character, and your character is looking at things through fresh eyes. And then levels 4 through 7, or when your character starts becoming more powerful, you start getting those spells that can really do damage, and And then once you hit fifth level spells, like around level 9, the wheels start coming off the wagon a bit because now the game becomes very swingy. And you're right. If you have to write these adventures that don't allow players to think out of the box, because thinking out of the box sometimes can make your adventure end in 30 minutes at those high levels because those spells can do it.
Exactly. So I think anyone out there, if you're wanting to write something that someone hasn't done, then write high level adventures that aren't railroads.
Agreed. Now, some of those that are out there aren't necessarily adventures; they're mega dungeons. Because even if you break one section of a mega dungeon, you probably aren't going to break other sections. They're so huge. And to me, a well-written mega dungeon is a bit of a hex crawl. Because
you know what Eric Hoffman would say, right?
What?
Every hex crawl is like a dungeon. It just has more exits out of the room. There's 6.
All right. Who am I to argue with Eric Hoffman? He's one of the best people that ever appears on your podcast. It's like I swear to God, man. When I pick up my niece, when I have to do uncle duties, I have to drive out to Long Island to pick up my niece from school. It's like, okay, oh, good, there's a new Hobbs Friends. Time to catch up.
Yeah, I mean, he was the first guest that I had on for a reason, because that dude does know a lot and has a really keen mind about old school play. So, pretty cool guy.
And I noticed that your guests aren't just hex crawlers, but they are actually adventure writers and game writers, and you've managed to have a nice stable of regular recurring guests.
Hey man, I'm lucky. It's the friendly part, I'm telling you. And they all want to be famous, I guess. I don't know.
Oh, well, yeah, because let's be honest, being on a podcast makes one famous.
Oh, without question.
Oh, jeez. It's like that bad, good famous, right? No, it's
can be.
Yeah, well, I will say this. I mean, I've been blogging for close to 10 years. And since I've been going to conventions, I've had people come up to me and say, hey, I read the Tavern and then yada, yada, yada. But since I started the daily podcast, I at Gamehole, the number of people coming to me, Tenkar, I listen to your podcast. I listen to it every day. There is a certain intimacy about being able to talk with your voice and people hearing that and getting to know you. I mean, they can know you through written word on Facebook, Google Plus, MeWe, a blog, and that's one thing. But to get to hear your voice, the intonations, the frustrations, the joy, your thoughts, I think it hits a different level.
Oh, I would absolutely agree. I felt that way just from the podcast I listened to before I started podcasting. Like when I met the guys, I'm like, I just realized that I feel like I know you and you have no idea who I am. So I'm not going to be as friendly as I would if I would think. Like Brett and Sean, I used to listen to Gaming and BS a lot.
Right.
And when I knew Sean, but I didn't know Brett, but I was like, man, I feel like I know you. And he's like, yeah, I get that a lot. And it's kind of weird, but now I get it. I get people that I just meet or whatever, and they know a lot of things about me between, the shows that I do or whatever, especially Random Screed, really. But it's almost uncomfortable how personal that actual podcast is. When people say they listen to Hobbs and Friends, I'm like, oh, cool. Did you like this guest or that guest? But when they say they listen to Random Screed, I'm like, oh, okay. So what do you think about that?
What do you think about me now? I'll be honest with you. Random Screed is probably one of Rachel's favorite podcasts to listen to when I pop in and know what's our podcast.
Okay. I mean, I can understand that because it's not really about gaming. That's something I talk about sometimes, but that's not what it's really about. So,
but now Random Screed in a lot of ways was the spark that lit this whole Anchor OSR fire.
And it is.
Yeah. So tell us about that. First off, how did you find Anchor? And secondly, what made you think to do Random Screed?
That's a good question. It's probably going to start in a way that would surprise. It had to do with Sean P. Kelly, which almost anything in my podcasting world, he's really probably my mentor.
Okay.
And I was at Gamehole probably the first year after Hobbs and Friends started, and I was talking to Eric Frankhouse. He has an anchor cast as well. It's called EFP, which Eric Frankhouse presents. But he was talking about Anchor and really talking about it and how awesome it was. And Sean Kelly is a big guy for owning everything that you do. And he's like, hey, it's free. It's not going to last very long. It's kind of not the best way to go. And this was, I don't know, 2 years ago, 3 years ago now, maybe.
Really?
And we were like, okay. And then I finally listened to it. Well, I was listening to podcasts and I was like, man, I really wish there was a way that I could talk to the podcasters and, just have mentioned things about what they're writing. It's almost like the old blog days where people would write a blog and then you would do a comment, or you would write your own blog in reference to what they were writing and talk about it with your own view, right? Your own point of view. So if we had a podcast that I could listen to different podcasts and say, hey, today I'm listening to Gaming and BS episode 135, and these guys got it all wrong, and I think it should be like this. And then they could listen to it and call in and we could have a conversation. It would be a more, I wouldn't say immediate, because obviously you have to wait, but the whole idea was, hey, if I could get a bunch of guys on here doing the same thing about different podcasts, we could really, almost emulate what was happening with blogs.
Joe the lawyer said the same thing. He was like, yeah, this just feels like when the OSR blog scene was really hitting its stride.
That was my original idea. And then I found that I was more talking about maybe myself and what was going on and with my issues. And I realized that maybe, and it helped. It seemed like it helped, even though I wasn't talking to a therapist exactly. I was talking to tons of people who were listening. And then I realized people were saying, hey, what you're saying is helping me deal with my wife who is bipolar. And when she's in a depression, it's really, you're speaking in a way that helps me understand better. Or if I'm talking about how my wife feels about me being depressed or manic, then someone else is like, wow, this is how I feel when, my spouse is depressed or in the state of depression. So I was really getting a lot of feedback that is, it's awesome that people like Hobbs and Friends, but when someone is saying, hey, you saved my marriage because, your insights helped us discuss it and talk about it like people with big pants on, like adults. And that's a whole nother level of humbling and just a good feeling, to be helping people somehow. And that's kind of what Random Screed was, but that's not really what the OSR anchorites are really. That was people listening to the show and coming, like some of the first people who came in, like Tim Shorts and Matt Jackson. There were only a few of us and we were all listening to each other's shows and commenting on them and making jokes back and forth. But somehow other people got in, like some people listen only to Matt's show and never heard my show because they're friends of his or fans of his, or they're fans of Gothridge Manor or whatever. And they came in their own way and they were like, hey, there's other shows here. And now, I mean, I don't even know how many there are really, probably in the 50s or something. I know there's at least 200 members of the OSR anchorites community on G+.
That many? I had no idea. That's awesome.
I mean, I don't know if they're all doing shows or if they're just listening or just calling in or whatever. The whole concept of the anchorites was really another way to do it. You got the people who are doing shows, and this is a place where the people doing shows are all gathering and you can talk to them. And I don't know how much of that happened really on G+, but when we started, when Jose started the Audio Dungeon Discord for people to interact with Forlorn Shores and our show that broke off from Hobbs and Friends that obviously we're calling Hex Talk.
Right.
When that started, we started our own channel, and you're on it, and you can see that I'm not saying there's as many people as on the Tenkar's Tavern, but you got a ton more groups of people, but there are people who are interested and want to talk about Anchor, right? And the Anchor shows that are out there, or some podcasts in general, but it really has grown into something kind of how I envisioned it, but I didn't realize I would be the one starting it or creating that. So that's pretty crazy, I guess.
Yeah, and it's pretty special. And I'll be honest with you, man. I think Anchor is a great service if you're trying to do a basic podcast, which is what I'm doing. If you're looking to do all bells and whistles, there are paid services that you can use out there. But for somebody who wants to be able to do a podcast from their phone or their tablet, which I occasionally do. Usually, I'm using my desktop or a laptop. But if I'm outside, I did an episode with Joe the lawyer from a pub in Manhattan after Hit the Complete Strategist, and that was a fucking blast. And you couldn't. I don't think you could do that as easily with other podcast services.
No, I mean, I've tried it with like my Zoom, where I've been in like the bathroom interviews, or like I did some stuff from Gen Con. It just isn't the same, because then you take it back and you try to decide what you're going to take out or what you're not going to during editing. Whereas if you just do it and everyone knows, hey, they're on their phones, it's just kind of it's part of the conceit, right? We have conceits in dungeons that say, hey, you're just going to go into this mega dungeon and you're going to do this way. Well, in podcasting, I think the conceit about Anchor, not everyone does it, because some people do a very nice show, but obviously me, I started driving around in my work van and it's loud as heck, and you hear my GPS going off and my turn signals, or me complaining about traffic.
I love the turn signals going off. Listen, to me, that's part of the charm. I'll be honest with you. It's like I know know Jason's out there right now. I know what he's doing, and like I said, for us recording the bar, and you can hear the server coming up to us, and it's like, with the Irish brogue, another round, folks. There's that is part of the charm of doing that, and I've 200 plus episodes, even with my interviews, like this, which I'm recording on our Discord server. Minimal, if any, editing. Pretty much, it's start recording, end recording. There we go.
Done.
Done. I mean, my thoughts is it should feel like almost like a late night TV interview show, where what you're seeing is what you're getting. There are no outtakes. If you're watching it live, it is what it is. So even if I'm recording it and then putting it up 10 minutes later, it was recorded live. I'm not going in and taking out my foo bars. They're more fun to leave them in anyway.
Yeah, it's more relatable. I mean, reality is flawed, right? Real people are flawed. That's why Facebook is such a joke, and most of the time, because people don't show their flaws on Facebook. They show this super shiny idea of family or whatever, and it's totally fake and kind of sickening in some ways. But when you're doing a show like this, or like Random Screed, and people can hear, real life going on in the background, I think there's something primordial or something within people that say, wow, this is a totally real person. What he's saying is exactly how he feels, and everything about that. So there's something that you can really kind of latch on to and feel closer, really, in some ways, even than you would on a very edited and polished podcast.
Oh, certainly. And now, of course, remember, I started out solely as a blogger, and now I do both. And it's funny, I never get complaints from anybody that listens to the podcast about, oh, I saw this, you had a blog post that you didn't talk about the topic on the podcast, and I'm disappointed because now I got to go and read it. But I got a number of people who complain that I talk about stuff on the podcast that I don't share on the blog, and I don't have 10 minutes to listen. And I understand that, but these two mediums are from me creatively different, and the podcasting is very much, I don't want to say freedom, but very freeing.
I think almost all the OSR anchorites would agree with you. That's what they found, that just being able to pick up their phone and talk about whatever it is they want to. Some people do put a lot more effort, or it's scripted. And I mean, that's totally cool. But the idea that you don't have to get on your computer and log into your WordPress and find images and do research and do a nice long blog post, and all you got to do is talk for 10 or 15 minutes. That's like you say, there's something liberating about the ability to do that, especially on a daily basis, right? It's got to be way quicker for you to do your podcast daily than it was for you to daily. Now, I'm not saying that you were writing novels or anything in your blog, because that would be a lie. But
no. Listen, the great thing about blogging, and if you look at the history of blogging is generally shorter posts. Some people do long ones, and that's great. I did frequently short ones. At one point I was averaging like 3.5 posts a day, and I was working. No fucking clue how that worked out. Now I'm probably, a post and a half, somewhere between 1 2 posts a day, but I still haven't missed putting up a post in over 5 years, 6 years. I've
Yeah.
gotten something up every day. With the same thing with the podcast, I've gotten something up every day, and I will be the first to admit that I have yet to actually put anything into the podcast bank for like a fucked up day where I don't have the 10 minutes to do something. I have nothing stored. Everything comes out pretty much within minutes after I record it. I have nothing stored, and I really should, but live dangerously, right?
I guess. I mean, obviously for Hobbs and Friends, I try to bank things and have things in the can, but it doesn't always work out that way for, like you say, for a random Screed, for an anchor type cast. It would seem weird, but I'm sure some people who do put a lot more editing and they're doing nice bumpers or adding music or they're doing different things that it would make some sense to do that. But I think, like I said, it's more relatable, man, if it's just straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak, right? It's just kind of you're feeling it and it's coming out and that's what you get. But I mean, obviously that makes it a little rambly, right? So, I
Yes.
mean, there was a pretty famous guy in our circles who, complained about a lot of the D&D type podcasts being rambly. And
Oh, I've had certain complaints, although I've also been told that most people listen to not most, but a number of people listen to my podcast here at a 1.5 speed because apparently I take too long to talk, so they just speed me up.
well, if you're trying to listen to all of the OSR Anchorite podcasts, that's the only way you could do it is if you went
Yeah.
faster. Because there are so many people out there talking and putting out content that someone likes. I'm not saying I'm a big fan of all of them, but I am saying that I'm a big fan of all the people, right?
Yeah.
So, and
Well,
the only way you'd be able to listen to even half of them really is if you listened at higher speed. And I do that myself. I listen to Spellburn at higher speed because Lord Bernick is such a slow talker.
oh man, I haven't listened to Spellburn in a while. I haven't been running anything I haven't really run anything except at conventions now in about a year. So I probably have to get back into running my own campaign on like Roll20, and then I'll get back into listening to podcasts like Spellburn because that's where I would steal ideas sometimes and or realize what products in the DCC lineup that I don't have that I can convert to Swords and Wizardry because I love the adventures. Not thrilled about the system, a
Mhm.
little swingy, but their adventures, especially if you decide to go episodic, not so much hex crawling, but if you want to do kind of weird science episodic DCC adventures are awesome. They're a great resource for that.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the art and the writing for almost all the DCC products. They're pretty railroady,
Oh
but
yeah,
they're kind of almost have to be just because of the way DCC can go, right? Because there's so many weird, crazy stuff that can happen even at first level or even as a during the funnel that it's kind of almost has to be that way.
right. And if you look at a lot of the earlier funnels, usually after your initial entrance, you usually had two, maybe three options of directions to go in, but in the end, you always wound up at the same spot
Yeah,
because
yeah,
you had to, because otherwise you didn't get to the end game of that adventure. So I understand
right.
why.
So that reminds me, I was going to ask you something, but now it kind of went out my head. It was kind of about the DCC. Oh, this is it. So are you turning into one of those guys that just talks about gaming a lot and doesn't really play that much, Eric?
Like I said, I'll be honest with you. I still run at conventions. I still run games at conventions, and I'm enjoying that. Uh, but I've found that, well, at least really last couple months, free time has been limited. Retirement is not the retirement that I expected. Yeah, it's been busy, and of course, a lot of the business is I created it for myself.
That's
Gotta,
what you do.
you got to do that daily podcast. You got to put out the post or two on the blog. You got to do unofficial consulting work sometimes for people, and you realize that all of a sudden it's like, where the hell did my day go? What happened?
I've heard that about retirees. I wouldn't know because I'm still working like a dog.
Well, here's the thing that I learned about retirement. The first thing that happens in retirement is that your family realizes that you're retired. And that means, oh, what means you can pick up your niece every Wednesday from school.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Oh, well, you can take your mother shopping these 2 days. Everybody suddenly puts time in for your free time, which is less free then. But it's a beautiful thing. I have no complaints on this. I could not be as involved in a hobby or the community as I am if it wasn't for me being retired. I mean, I consider myself blessed. Since retirement, I wrote Swords and Wizardry Light with James Spahn. We put together Swords and Wizardry Continuum Light. I am the quote convention coordinator for Fraud God Games. Don't ask me. It just means I think that I run the sales booth and run games at conventions, but I don't know what the exact responsibilities are. But
Impressive
it sounds like
title.
oh, it sounds really awesome. I'm actually throwing my hat into. I'd like to be a project coordinator, which sounds like a position with very few responsibilities. That's something I'd love to have. So we'll see.
I don't know. I think isn't that what Edwin's title is? He seems pretty busy.
No, he's probably project manager.
Oh, okay.
See. When my vision of coordinating is just to like put people together, right? We've coordinated, and yeah. Edwin's I don't know how he does it, man. He is a workhorse.
He is. He's a beast. He's awesome. He's an awesome guy. All those guys are. So
yeah, no, they're a great group of people to hang with. And
yeah, for a super toxic community, there's really a lot of.
Yeah, well, listen. Here's my thoughts on the toxicity. The individuals that have called the OSR toxic are the ones that have always self-selected them out. That they've self-selected themselves outside the community.
Yeah,
so
I don't think they're really in the community if they feel that way, or they. Right. It's certainly not been my experience.
Right. So it's kind of like your body has an infection and it expels the infection, and the infection comes back and says, "You were toxic, and that's why I left." It's like, no, you're an infection, and that's why we asked you to leave. It's just a perspective. It's the perspective. But well, dude, listen. Remember what I told you, man? That you and I could talk for fucking ever.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah. Well, again, we have hit a new high.
Oh my god.
Yeah, we're over 40 minutes on this, man. And we
someone better get the scissors out.
No. Listen, even though my regular episodes are 10 to 15 minutes, my interviews are I jokingly said, oh, they're 20 to 30, but nothing's been less than like 34, and now we're well over 40, and I think it's because everybody in the community, we are a community. We have relationships. We have connections, and it shows in these interviews. It really does, and it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, there's a built-in camaraderie that comes through gaming and conventions and all those things. I agree. Even G Plus, really, because now it's almost like a nostalgia, right? Because it's going away, so now we can call it nostalgia on G Plus.
Yeah. It's like, oh, I remember because back in the early days of G Plus, I had a huge influx of people who had me circled, and some Canadian, I don't know, YouTuber or something like that, shared me out with her circles, and I gained like thousands of people. So when Google Plus shuts down, I'm going to be very close to 10,000 people in my circles, which comes nowhere near close to any other social media. But Facebook drives at least 3 times the traffic to my blog that G Plus does.
It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, if you're not in the gaming, you feel like G Plus doesn't even do anything. Even like SEO people or marketing people, they'll be like, "Oh, there's no such thing as G Plus, really."
Yeah, they never heard of it, and that's a fail on the part of Google because they never pushed it. You can see Facebook commercials on TV. You never saw Google Plus commercials on TV.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting.
But all right,
let's wrap this up, brother.
Let's wrap it up. Jason, thank you so much for joining. I really appreciate it. Maybe one day we'll do an improv crossover between the podcast and Random Screed and call it like Tavern Screed or some shit like that. You know, because I've done a couple of crossovers now, and they're fun and they go up on both sides. You know, we do one file for both podcasts and just have at it. But man, this was good. My cat now is knocking things off my desk. Are you telling me it's time for me to get off the computer too?
Must be it.
Apparently so. So, folks, thank you for listening. Really, I appreciate it. Jason appreciates it. Be good. God bless.
Do I get a last word before you do yours?
Yes. All right.
Hey, it's better to burn out. It's better to burn out than to fade away. My tag.
Well, definitely, man. I would certainly go with that, because if you fade away, man, that's kind of depressing.
Pod fading, bad.
Pod fading is bad. All right, folks. I'll catch you all tomorrow. Later.